What's up everyone? Just wanted to let you know that for this video my aspect ratio on the camera got changed to a 4:3 instead of a 16:9, so the ratio on this video is going to be a little messed up. Lesson learned, check your camera settings before recording a whole entire freaking video and then editing and find out it's all wrong. But can't waste all that time. Wanted to show y'all what we've done to the Orthia. And next time, I will for sure check my camera settings and make sure we don't record in a 4:3. So enjoy my square video. What's up everyone? Today we are going to be introducing a new car to the fleet. We have basically an EK wagon. This is a Honda Orthia. It is not made in the States, so this one is actually right-hand drive and imported from Japan. It's automatic, four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, and of course it's a wagon. This thing's got a lot of room in it. And what is the first thing we're going to do? The most important thing you got to do: wheels, some advans. They don't have center caps on it right now, but we got all that stuff. They kind of look weird without the center caps. So wheels, coilovers, control arms. So we'll start out with all the parts that I bought. I actually ended up buying the wrong parts, but I'm gonna make them work. So I bought EK control arms. The EK control arms are longer. Turns out I needed EG control arms. So I went ahead and bought EG control arms. The only issue is the EG control arms are wider than the EK. So now the coilovers here are too narrow. So I went ahead and just ground down some of these spacers so that I can fit the EK coilovers on the EG control arms. So if I were to do it all again, I would buy EG rear lower control arms and EG coilovers. And then for the rear upper control arm, it's the same for the EG or the EK. And for the front, I bought EK front upper control arms. So you don't have to buy all the control arms and everything. I bought the front uppers so I can have the camber adjustment, and the rear uppers so I can have the camber adjustment. And I just wanted to convert the rear to the fork style. Since the fork style is how they came in the United States, I just wanted to go ahead and convert it. Plus all these parts were available versus the I style were not. So the first thing we have to do is get this thing up in the air and take the tires off. We're going to start with the rear coilovers and rear control arms. So with the wheel off on this side, you can see that we have the upper control arm, we have the coilover, and then the lower control arm. And this is what I was talking about with the I-type coilover. The bolt goes through the center of the coilover and there's a bushing. So we pretty much have access to everything down here except for the top of the coilover. And all we've done is lift up the rear carpet and tried to look. It looks like in order to get this piece of trim off, which is what you need to get off to get this piece of trim, and then take the fabric off right here to get to the top of the coilover, we're gonna have to take the rear seats out. So basically just folded up the carpet, and then we're just gonna take the 10mm bolts out of the top of the seats here, pull the top of the seats out, and then we'll be able to get the bottom of the seat out to get this piece of trim off. Now that we have the top of the seat off, we have access to this 10mm bolt that holds the bottom part of the seat on. One cool thing about removing the seats is sometimes you find some cool stuff. Sick. But now that we have the seat off, we can remove the bolt at the bottom of these foam panels on both sides and get those off. Next, we're going to take this top panel off, so we'll just take the Phillips out here, here, and then after removing that panel, we will remove this trim piece. So we have a bunch of pop tabs that pop out and then should pop right off, and then we'll have access to the top of the coilover. Now we pop the front clips off. We have access to the top of the coilover, so that gives us access to everything we need to start installing the coilovers. So now we're going to start out. Now that we have all the interior pieces out, we can access the control arm. So the top hat's a 14. Luckily all the bolts are actually 14. So I'm gonna drop all this out, take the two top nuts off, take the lower control arm bolt out on both sides, and then drop the coilover and the control arm out as assembly. And then we'll take the bolts out of the upper control arm and put the new upper control arm in, and then install the lower and upper the lower control arm and the coilover. Once we have it all out, you'll go ahead and take this bolt off because you will need it to install the new coilover. Now that we have the coilover and everything apart, I'm gonna go ahead and take the rear upper control arm off and install the new one. With the new control arm, I went as far out as I felt comfortable. And it looks like I have about 1.5 centimeters of adjustment on each part of the threads. If I went any further out, I'd be scared of the threads ripping out of the collar. So I wanted to make sure I measured that before trying to correct the camber and then going too far out. This is still a little further than I'd like. I'd like to be able to go in, but it looks like with the camber, I may have to run some negative camber with these control arms. We just won't know until we get it all together. So here we go. Put the upper control arm on. Alright, rear upper control arm is installed. So now we're going to go ahead and install the rear lower control arm and the coilover. With the ASR rear lower control arms, you do have to install the bushings. They just slide right in. Now we're ready to install it. In order to put the coilover on by myself, I just picked it up, held it up over here, and then reached around and then put the nuts on top. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that real quick. And now that I have the coilover on, I'm gonna go ahead and put the lower control arm on. that it is installed, I'm going to go ahead and jack it up so that we can put the bolt in the control arm. Alright, last thing I have to do is tighten the top of the coilover, and then this side is done. All you have to do is repeat it for the other side, and boom, both sides are done. We're ready for some wheels on the rear, and then we'll jack the front up and we'll do the front coilovers and front control arms. Almost forgot that I had to take a lot of the interior out, so got to put all that back together, then we're ready for the front. Whew, all right, now that we have the back done, I jacked the front up and I took the front wheels off. So since I'm going to be replacing the upper control arm, you actually have to get to the bolts from up here. So we're going to take the battery out on this side, and on this side we're going to have to take the airbox out. So I'm gonna go ahead and get those removed, because I'm gonna take the upper control arm off before removing the coilover. Now that we have the airbox and the battery removed, we could get to the upper control arm bolts, which are on each side of the strut towers. Other than removing the airbox and the battery, each side will be the same install, just reversed, or on the other side. So we're gonna go ahead and get one side done real quick, and then we'll finish the other side up. First thing I'm gonna do on this side is take the bolt off the ball joint for the upper control arm, and then drop the spindle down and then get the control arm fully removed. These bolts are 14 millimeter for the upper control arm. And now that you have the two bolts out, the control arm will come out. And next, I'm going to take the bolt out the bottom of the controller, or the coilover. And after I take it out the bottom, I'm going to take the nuts off the top. The nut for the ball joint was a 17 millimeter. This bolt for the coilover is going to be a 17 millimeter also. Alright, since I had put the other side together, it actually is the sway bar is pulling this side up. So I'm gonna go ahead and push this side down and get the controller, or get the coilover out. Now that the strut is out, we're going to remove the fork, which is this 14 millimeter bolt here, and then we will be ready to install the coilovers. Alright, I'm going to set the fork inside, and then I'm gonna put the coilover up inside and put the bolts on the, or the nuts on the top. Now I'm gonna slide the fork up and put the bolt in it. All right, now that the bolt's in the fork, I did not tighten it all the way. I'm gonna raise the assembly up so that I can put the bolt inside of the fork. All right, now that the bolt's in, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten it. And now I'm going to tighten the bolt on the fork. Now I'm going to tighten the bolts on the top of the coilover, or nuts. Now we're ready to put the upper control arm in. These are labeled left and right. You can't really see it very well, but it's in the powder coating. Right here's an L. Alright, now that we have the upper control arm slid in, we can go ahead and install the bolts. I'm not going to tighten these bolts yet. Now with the bolts installed for the upper control arm, I'm going to go ahead and slide the ball joint into the spindle and tighten up the nut. Alright, and once the nut is tightened, we'll go ahead and slide the cotter pin in and bend it, and then we'll load up the suspension and tighten up the upper control arm bolts. Alright, so I'm just gonna load up the suspension real quick and then tighten the bolts. Now that we have all the bolts tightened on this side, this install is done. So next I'm going to put the wheel on, and then you just repeat the same step for the other side. And put the wheel on. And once you have everything installed, we're going to go ahead and put the air box back on, put the battery back in, and we'll lower it and see how low we got this bad boy. I put the coilovers at max low. So that's max low on the rear, and then that's as far out on the rear control arm that I want to go for camber adjustment. So we still have quite a bit of camber. I'm going to try to get some of that out by adding some washers behind the front, or behind the upper control arm in the rear. But let's go ahead and get a wheel on it and see what it looks like. Here it is. Wheels installed, front's all the way lowered, the rear is all the way lowered, and I also messed with the preload to get it a little bit lower. So the rear didn't go as low as I would like it to, and I don't want to mess with the preload any more than what it already is. So I think with a meatier tire, I went with 195 front and rear, so the rear stretched a little bit. the front looks pretty good, but the rear is stretched a little bit, and then the fitment's a little off. So I think once I get the camber adjusted a little better and a meatier tire on there, I should be able to just run like a 10 mil spacer or something to get the rear fitment right. And the front fitment is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. I don't think I'm gonna mess with the front fitment at all. So the front wheels are 16 by 7 plus 35, and the rear wheels are 16 by 8 plus 38. So that's why the rear is stretched a little bit and the front isn't. But overall, I think it fits pretty well. It looks pretty good. And the front, I went on the upper control arm. I went with the camber adjustment all the way out. Had enough adjustment on that, just the rears. I didn't have enough adjustment, and I had to run some spacers on the upper control arm. So I'll show you what these look like here. Here's what it looks like on the upper control arm with the spacers. These are just thick walled spacers. You find them anywhere at any hardware store, they should have them. I ended up putting a 1/2 inch spacer on and it wasn't enough. So then I went and got a 1/4 inch one. So I have a 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch spacer in the rear with the rear upper control arm. As far as I want it to be, I have about a centimeter on each side of thread engagement. So definitely didn't want to go out any further. And I still have a little bit of negative camber, so I think I might have to go with a bigger spacer. And then whenever I put the spacers on, I replace the bolts with longer bolts so that you have enough thread engagement on the bolt. And like I said, I'll have to go with a little bit more of a spacer in the rear just to get the camber a little bit better. I probably have, I don't know, -2 or 3 degrees. But here it is. I freaking love wagons, dude. This thing looks sick. As soon as I got this thing, I started looking into drift wagons to replace the vet, but can't get rid of the vet. Gotta keep the vet. Too much work into that thing. I hope everyone enjoyed this video. Hope everything was informative, and if you want to see any more content, just check out my channel, and we'll have some more content coming. I don't know about on the Orthia. It's just a daily, so probably just gonna keep wheels and coilovers on it and just some little stuff. Window tint. We put these side marker lights on. They're sequential. $25 on eBay. Check them out. I should have done this side. Check those out. Probably the best $25 I ever spent on a car. Cheapest mod. Anyway, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more.